He was just a broke single dad in row 17 until the plane fell and the CEO called his name. "You ever wonder what silence sounds like at 30,000 feet?" Jack asked quietly, adjusting the tiny oxygen monitor clipped to his daughter's wrist. Emily didn't look up. She was too busy drawing hearts on the foggy airplane window with her finger. "I think it sounds like this," she whispered, tracing one final swirl before leaning her head on his shoulder. Jack didn't reply. He just closed his eyes and let the hum of the engines fill the space between them. Not the silence of peace, but of delay, of something waiting to break. Seat 17A and 17B held a father and a daughter clinging to borrowed time. Jack Dawson, 38, wore the face of a man who'd spent too many nights fixing broken things and too few fixing himself. His hands were rough, his jeans faded, and the gray hoodie he wore bore the faded logo of a union that no longer existed. The little girl beside him, barely 6, was pale as paper with lips that turned blue when she laughed too hard. Emily, his entire universe, clutched a stuffed bear missing one ear and a heart that struggled to beat on schedule. Across the aisle in 17C sat Charlotte Hale, immaculately poised with her tablet open but untouched. Her navy blue blazer and neatly tucked silk blouse screamed executive, but her body language, arms, crossed eyes guarded, suggested someone trying not to be noticed. She'd booked the flight last minute under a pseudonym, not to escape the public, but the mirror. The fallout from her company's drone navigation failure had yet to hit the press, but she knew it was only a matter of time. "Excuse me," Jack said gently. "Mind if I slip by? She's got to use the restroom." He nodded toward Emily, now squirming. Charlotte pulled her legs back in silence, offering no expression. Her eyes barely met his before drifting back to the untouched screen. Emily looked up at her. "Thank you, lady." Charlotte's lip curled almost imperceptibly. "You're welcome, little one." The aisle was tight, and Jack awkwardly maneuvered around the cart wedged beside row 16. A flight attendant gave him a look that said she'd seen 100 Jacks today, tired men with tired clothes and tired stories. He gave her a nod anyway. Jack nodded at everyone, even when no one nodded back. Back in his seat, Emily nestled into his side, her tiny hand squeezing his forearm. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you think my heart will ever beat like other kids?" Jack hesitated, then smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Your heart already beats better than most, baby. It knows what matters." Charlotte caught that. She glanced sideways, studying Jack's profile, the unshaven jaw, the scar near his temple, the way he seemed to carry 10 years more than his age. Then the plane jolted, just a nudge like turbulence waking up. But Jack's eyes snapped open. A low, metallic clunk vibrated through the floor. The overhead lights flickered once, then again. For most passengers, it passed unnoticed, a hiccup. For Jack, it was the whisper before the scream. Emily sat up. "What was that?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Just the plane stretching its legs." But Charlotte had noticed it too. She sat up straighter, her eyes darting toward the flight attendant calmly securing a beverage cart. Then came the second jolt, sharper this time, more insistent. The engines dropped in pitch. The comforting hum faltered. People began to murmur. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the voice over the intercom, calm but brittle. "We're experiencing a temporary mechanical issue. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Then the right engine stopped. No scream, no fireball, just silence. And in that silence, Jack Dawson heard something no one else did. It wasn't just a failed engine. It was a moment choosing him. The lights blinked, then half the cabin fell into darkness. Gasps echoed. Children cried. Overhead compartments rattled from pressure change. A woman in 21B started sobbing. From the front, a flight attendant sprinted down the aisle, Sandra Martinez's uniform sharp voice trembling. She didn't head for the cockpit. She came straight to row 17. "Jack Dawson," she barked, finger-stabbing toward his seat. "Cockpit. Now." Charlotte turned, stunned. "Wait him." A businessman behind her scoffed. "Are you kidding me? That guy looks like he fixes vending machines." But Sandra's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Cockpit. Now." Jack blinked. "You're sure we have no time?" Emily gripped his sleeve. "Daddy?" Jack looked down, smoothing her hair back gently. "I'll be back before you finish drawing your next heart. Promise." He stood. Charlotte watched him rise, stunned by the shift in him. The slouch was gone. The uncertainty disappeared. What stood before her wasn't a janitor. It was something remembered. She reached for his arm as he passed. "Are you a pilot?" Jack paused, met her eyes. "No," he said. "I was one." And then he walked down the flickering aisle toward a cockpit gripped by chaos, leaving behind the girl who trusted him blindly, and the woman who had no idea she was about to trust him too. The cockpit door was ajar, swinging slightly with each turbulent tremor. Jack stepped in and immediately understood why they'd called him. The Captain Rodriguez was slumped over the yoke, his breathing shallow eyes glazed, fighting for oxygen. The first officer lay unconscious in his seat, his oxygen mask dangling uselessly at his neck. The backup systems had failed. No power, no pressure, just blinking warnings and the cold whisper of altitude loss. Jack didn't hesitate. He moved like someone whose muscles remembered what the soul tried to forget. First, stabilize. He took the captain's shoulder, eased him back, then reached over the console to deactivate the autopilot override, fighting against manual control. The plane jerked slightly, then glided smoother, unstable, but no longer in freefall. "Who are you, the flight attendant?" Sandra asked from behind her voice, both demanding and desperate. Jack didn't look up. His fingers were dancing across switches, assessing damage, rebooting what he could. "Former Air National Guard," he said. C-130 instructor. Flew emergency night ops out of Kandahar. Left the sky 10 years ago. Sandra stared at him like he'd just told her he could breathe underwater. "Can you fly this?" she asked. Jack turned, finally meeting her gaze. His voice didn't rise. His expression didn't change. But there was something in his eyes that stilled the air between them. "If I can't, none of us are walking off this plane." Sandra nodded once and backed away. Jack glanced at the co-pilot, still unconscious, and leaned over to secure his seatbelt. Then with a grunt, he slid into the captain's chair. It wasn't home, but it wasn't foreign either. The metal felt familiar under his palms. His eyes scanned the remaining active instruments. Altimeter dropping fast. Airspeed erratic. No power from either engine. Hydraulics were sputtering, but not gone. Trim controls were functional. That was something. He opened the comms and tried the intercom to the cabin. Static. He toggled to external frequency. "Flight 847 to ATC. Do you copy? Mayday, Mayday. Dual engine failure. Crew incapacitated. Currently gliding uncontrolled." Nothing. He checked the frequency again. Still silence. Back in the cabin, Charlotte was still staring at the door Jack had disappeared through. A child whimpered behind her. Someone was praying in Spanish 2 rows back. Is he flying the plane now? The businessman across from her asked, voice half mocking, half horrified. Charlotte didn't answer. She was thinking of the way Jack had looked at Emily like she was the only thing holding his world together. And the way he'd looked at her, Charlotte, not like a CEO, not like a stranger, just like a human being. She hadn't been looked at like that in years. Emily tugged on her sleeve. Is he gonna fix it? Charlotte turned, knelt to her level. The girl's lips were starting to turn pale again. He's gonna do everything he can, Charlotte said softly. And I think your dad is very, very good at fixing things. Emily smiled, then leaned her head against Charlotte's arm. Charlotte flinched at first, then let the child rest. In the cockpit, Jack finally got through. This is Jack Dawson assuming command of Flight 847. Both pilots incapacitated. Aircraft has experienced complete power loss. I am executing a dead stick glide. There was a pause, just static, and then a voice crackled through. Say again. Did you say? Jack Dawson. Jack's eyebrows furrowed. Yes, please hold. Verifying identity. He closed his eyes for a beat. The plane groaned as it lost another 1,000 feet. He could almost hear the seconds scraping past. Then a new voice, calm, clipped, unmistakably military, cut through. This is Commander Sarah Lynn Air National Guard 139th Airlift Wing. Jack Dawson is verified. Give him whatever he asks for. Jack's jaw clenched. Sarah Lynn. He hadn't heard her voice in nearly a decade. Her belief in him hit harder than the emergency itself. Jack, she said, switching to a secure channel. You got this. I remember Kandahar. I remember you. The sky hasn't forgotten who you are. He swallowed hard. I don't need speeches, Sarah. I need vectors. Where's my nearest viable strip? You're 73 nautical miles from Greensboro. Wind east-southeast mild. Clear skies. No power means no second tries. You sure you're ready for this? Jack exhaled slowly. I wasn't ready to lose her, he whispered. Then don't. He toggled back to internal systems. Oxygen was still failing. Cabin pressure holding barely. Manual flap control was available. Jack adjusted the glide path. He remembered what his old instructor once told him: a good pilot flies the plane. A great one flies the people. And right now, 137 people, including one very small, very important heartbeat, were counting on him. In the cabin, Charlotte stared at the window, watching cloud layers pass like breath. She felt Emily shift again, curling closer into her side. Her own breath caught. A man she barely knew had stepped into chaos and become calm. What kind of man does that? Not the ones who speak the loudest. Not the ones with degrees hanging in glass offices, but the ones who've walked through fire and come out holding someone else's hand. Charlotte looked toward the cockpit again. Maybe, just maybe. This flight wasn't meant to break her. Maybe it was meant to land her. The cockpit smelled of sweat metal and memory. Jack's hands were steady, but his pulse beat like a drum inside his throat. Every screen that still functioned blinked a warning. Hydraulic pressure was dropping. Altitude bleeding fast. Engines silent as tombs. Only the wind answered now. He adjusted the trim by feel. It wasn't grace, it was muscle memory, the kind you earn over years of flying into things no one walks out of. His eyes scanned the dead panels, but he wasn't looking for data. He was looking for the one thing no system could give him: time. Behind him, Sandra hovered near the door, clutching the frame like it might disappear. "Do you need anything?" she asked, voice low. "Yeah," Jack said, eyes forward. "About 2 more hours of sky, but I'll take 15 minutes of faith." She almost smiled, then didn't. "The crew, we're with you." He nodded once. "Thanks. Let's hope gravity's willing to make a deal." Back in row 17, Charlotte sat frozen. Not with fear, but with something more complicated. Her hands rested on Emily's blanket-covered legs. The child had drifted into a soft, shallow sleep, her little chest rising and falling like waves barely reaching shore. Charlotte should have been panicking. That's what she used to do: control what could be controlled and shut down the rest. But Jack had walked into that cockpit like someone who knew what it meant to fall and not fear it. And something about that had steadied her. She reached into the seatback pocket and found Emily's drawing notebook. Flipping past scribbles of stars, rainbows, and uneven stick figures, she stopped at a page halfway through. It was a child's drawing of a man in a pilot's uniform standing on clouds. Above him, a heart with wings. Underneath, "My daddy is a sky hero." Charlotte stared at it for a long time. Altitude is dropping faster than expected. Sarah Lynn's voice crackled through the headset. "You'll need to adjust approach. Greensboro's pushing you clearance priority." Jack leaned into the mic. "No surprise. She's falling like a steel piano." "You okay up there?" Jack smirked bitterly. "I'm flying a dead plane with 137 lives in the back seat. So, no okay isn't the word I'd use." Sarah paused. "You're not alone, Jack." He swallowed. That was the thing that always cut the deepest, not the silence of failure but the echoes of people who still believed in you after. And yet, something inside him cracked open, not in panic but in remembrance. A desert airstrip, a midnight call, a young officer trapped in the burning wreckage of an overturned transport, Jack diving back into a fuselage seconds from collapse not because it was smart, but because he could. That was who he was, who he'd always been, and who he'd tried so damn hard to forget. Emily stirred. Her lips moved. Charlotte leaned closer. Daddy, the girl, mumbled barely audible. "Come back down." Charlotte brushed hair from Emily's forehead. "He will," she whispered. "He's just clearing the clouds first." The words surprised even her. Across the aisle, the businessman who'd scoffed earlier cleared his throat. "Do you really think he knows what he's doing?" Charlotte didn't answer immediately. Then she turned to him. "I think," she said slowly, "that man was born to fly in storms." The businessman blinked, unsure how to respond. Charlotte looked out the window, watching the sky burn soft orange as the sun began to dip. Light filtered through thin cloud layers like hope trying to find a way in. In the cockpit, Jack adjusted the glide ratio manually. Every foot of altitude had to buy them distance. He was playing chess with physics, and the board didn't forgive mistakes. He tapped a tiny photo taped to the console. It was old Emily at 3, grinning through missing teeth, holding a model airplane they'd built together from scrap. He hadn't looked at that picture in over 2 years, but he never removed it. "Talk to me," Jack Sarah said again, "not as a commander, as your friend." He exhaled through his teeth. "I walked away, Sarah, after Afghanistan, after the crash. I should have died with them. No, you lived for them. I quit flying for a reason, and now you're flying for one." Silence. Then Jack whispered more to himself than to her. "Maybe I never stopped flying. Just forgot why I took off in the first place." He looked out the windshield. The land was rising beneath them. Greensboro was still a speck in the distance. "Send emergency crews. This landing's not going to be pretty. I trust you're ugly more than most people's perfect." He smiled for the first time in hours. It felt strange, but right. Back in the cabin, Charlotte reached for her phone, then put it away. She didn't want to film this. She wanted to remember it. She leaned down to Emily again, whispered something only the child could hear. "I used to be afraid of pilots. I lost someone once because of a crash. I thought I'd never fly again." Emily blinked at her, but your dad, Charlotte, continued. "He doesn't just fly planes. He lifts people, even from the ground." Emily smiled sleepily. "He says, 'Love is heavier than wings.'" Charlotte felt her throat tighten. "Yeah," she said, voice cracking. "But somehow, he still carries it." And as the last light of day began to fade, the passengers aboard Flight 847, many still unaware of the miracle unfolding up front, sat surrounded not by panic, but by something rarer. Faith. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that lands. Jack tightened his grip on the yoke, not because the plane needed more pressure, but because he did. The cockpit had gone eerily still, save for the occasional electronic chime, a hollow reminder of the systems that had already died. At this altitude, there was no room for mistakes, no engine to rely on, no backup plan. Only glide. Dead stick. A phrase pilots respected and feared in equal measure. Jack Sarah's voice crackled again in his headset. "You're approaching 22,000 feet. At this descent rate, you've got 12 minutes max." "Copy," he said. "That's about 9 more minutes than I need." She paused. Still the same cocky bastard. "No," Jack murmured. "That guy didn't have a daughter." In the cabin, Charlotte sat ramrod straight as the plane gave another subtle dip. Her eyes darted to the overhead bin, then to the ceiling lights that flickered again like candle flames fighting wind. Emily stirred. Her breathing had grown shallower. Charlotte pressed a hand to the little girl's chest. "Hey, you okay?" Emily blinked up at her, her voice like paper tearing. "I feel floaty." Charlotte's heart clenched. "That's normal. Just a little altitude thing. Your dad's getting us down." "Is he scared?" Emily asked. Charlotte looked toward the front of the plane. The cockpit door was still shut. Then she leaned in close, brushing a hand through Emily's hair. "No," she whispered. "Your dad's not scared of falling. He's scared of not bringing you home." Jack adjusted flap settings manually, judging the airspeed by instinct now. Every part of his body was working, legs on rudder, left hand on trim, right hand adjusting elevator pitch. His shirt clung to him, soaked through. The captain's seat felt like fire and steel. His lips moved silently as he did the math in his head. At this weight, wind out of the east, drag coefficient minus power curve, you're doing what most of us only train for in Sims. Sarah said softer now. "You know that, right?" "Don't say that." "Why not?" "Because if I start thinking about what this is, I'll stop feeling what it has to be." He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. "This isn't a movie, Sarah," he said quietly. "It's not some redemptive arc. There's no soundtrack swelling behind me. It's just me and gravity, and a kid who needs to wake up tomorrow." In the back, a child began to cry. The businessman in 18D stood abruptly. "We're crashing, aren't we?" Sandra intercepted him fast. "Sir, sit down. I demand to speak to the pilot. He's flying the plane, not taking lunch orders," Sandra snapped. "So, unless you've logged more flight hours than gravity, stay in your seat and keep breathing." He sat, stunned. Charlotte looked over at her. The flight attendant gave her a nod. Charlotte returned it. Something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement, respect, maybe even the beginning of something that would outlast the storm they were in. In the cockpit, Jack pulled the microphone back. "Greensboro Tower. This is Flight 847. Current altitude 16,000 and descending. Dead stick approach. Requesting full emergency clearance," a young-sounding controller replied. "Flight 847. You are clear for runway 22. Winds calm. Fire and rescue are on standby. You have absolute priority." Jack nodded to no one. He was used to being last. It was unsettling being first. He toggled the intercom, his voice breaking through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this is Jack Dawson. Let's just say I'm your best shot at seeing the ground again." There was a ripple of nervous laughter. "I'm guiding us into Greensboro. We've lost both engines. We're flying on lift, not luck. I need you to trust gravity and trust me. We've got one shot." He paused. "And for those of you praying, keep doing it. I'm flying, but I don't mind sharing the load." The intercom clicked off. In the silence that followed, something shifted in the air. Not panic, not surrender. Something closer to unity. A man in 22B reached for his wife's hand. A teenage girl in 19A removed her earbuds. A young mother pressed her forehead to her sleeping child's. And Charlotte, holding Emily's hand tight, whispered, "He's not flying us down. He's lifting us home." Jack took a deep breath. This wasn't a cockpit anymore. It was a confession booth. And all he had to offer was repentance written in altitude and airspeed. 10,000 feet, no thrust, no second chances, no applause waiting at the gate. Just a father remembering who he used to be, and who he had to be again. Greensboro Tower, Flight 847 on final. His voice was calm, almost quiet. Sarah's voice returned in his ear this time, barely above a whisper. "Bring them in, Jack." He looked toward the dimming horizon. "Roger that." And the plane descended on purpose, by will, not by fear, not by failure, but by the hands of a man who refused to fall when someone needed him to fly. Flight 847, say again, we're not reading your transponder ID. Who is currently in command of the aircraft? Jack's jaw clenched as he fought both the glide slope and the rising tension in his headset. He was just shy of 9,000 feet and closing fast on what needed to be a perfect line toward Greensboro. But the controller's voice, young tentative, was slowing down what couldn't afford delay. This is Jack Dawson, civilian, former Air National Guard, C-130 instructor, 139th Wing. Both crew members are incapacitated. I have manual control. We're in dead stick descent. Requesting immediate clearance to land. There was a pause. Then came the words that felt like ice water in his spine. Sir, we're unable to verify your credentials. We can't officially grant clearance without validated command authority. Please hold for supervisory confirmation. Hold. Jack looked at the altimeter again. Greensboro's lights were just now cresting the horizon, a fragile thread of gold in a sea of darkness. We don't have the luxury to hold, he snapped. I'm flying 137 souls in a metal coffin. You don't need a badge, just look at the damn radar. We are coming in. I understand, sir, but FAA policy doesn't land planes. People do. Silence. He could feel it all unraveling. Not just the descent, but the thread he was barely holding inside himself. In the cabin, Charlotte heard the faint click of the intercom being turned off. She turned to Sandra, the flight attendant who had just returned from the galley. Why did he stop talking? Sandra shook her head. Probably switching channels. Coordination. He's got a lot to juggle. But is he being allowed to land? Sandra hesitated. And in that hesitation, Charlotte felt her stomach turn. We have to do something, she said. Sandra raised a brow. Like what Charlotte looked at her phone then at the terrified faces around her. The silence from the cockpit was a drumbeat now loud in its absence. You said the FAA listens to verified executive channels during in-flight emergencies, right? Sandra blinked. They might. Good. Charlotte stood. Because they're about to hear from someone they actually do recognize. Back in the cockpit, Jack toggled through settings. No time. No margin. He was down to 7th U to 400 feet. His voice was tight when he keyed the mic again. This is Flight 847. We are no longer requesting clearance. We are declaring emergency approach. I will make contact with the runway or the ground your call. Before the controller could reply, another voice broke in. Authoritative, calm, female. Greensboro Tower, this is Commander Sarah Lynn, United States Air National Guard. Authority code Delta Foxtrot 70. I confirm Jack Dawson has emergency command status. You will comply with full landing priority effective immediately. The controller stammered, then confirmed. Flight 847. You're cleared for emergency approach runway 22. All other traffic is grounded. Fire and medical crews are standing by. Jack exhaled, then smiled just a little. Sarah, you always did know how to crash a party. Her reply came soft. You just worry about not crashing that plane. A murmur moved through the cabin like a wave when the intercom clicked back on. This is your pilot, Jack said. Greensboro Tower has granted us full landing clearance. Final approach is locked in. We'll be wheels down in under 7 minutes. The cabin went silent. No one cheered, no one clapped. But for the first time, they believed. Charlotte returned to her seat beside Emily, who was now curled tightly in a ball, clutching the little stuffed bear like a lifeline. You did something, Emily said quietly, her voice barely audible. I just reminded them who they were talking to. Charlotte said, brushing a strand of hair off the girl's face. I knew they'd listen, Emily whispered. Charlotte smiled, eyes shining. Why's that? Emily looked up at her and said with the kind of certainty only a child can carry, because when Daddy speaks from his heart, even the sky listens. In the cockpit, Jack locked into final descent. Runway 22 appeared ahead, a black ribbon stitched with gold, the last promise of solid ground. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what this meant. He glanced down at the photo taped to the console again. Not today, he murmured. Not this time. Behind him, Sandra entered quietly. Everyone's secured, good, Jack said. Then after a pause, thanks for trusting a stranger with a broken past. She tilted her head. "No," she said. "I trusted a father with something to fight for. 6,000 feet. Then 5. Charlotte took Emily's hand again. The child's eyes were closed, her chest rising just a little easier. "You know," Charlotte whispered, "I've flown hundreds of times. First-class private jets, even helicopters." Emily's eyelids fluttered. "Really?" "Yeah," Charlotte smiled. "But this is the first flight I've ever felt safe on." In the control tower, one of the younger techs turned to the supervisor. "Sir, that guy Dawson, he doesn't show up in our active pilot database. No license on file." The supervisor didn't look away from the radar. "Yeah," he said, "and he's still the only person I'd want in that cockpit right now." Back inside that cockpit, Jack set his sights dead center on the glowing lights of the runway. His voice low and steady filled the cabin one last time. "Brace position, everyone. Eyes forward, hands on your heads, and just keep breathing." Then softly, almost to himself, "We're bringing this bird home." Jack's hands never left the controls. Every nerve in his body was tuned to the yoke, to the whisper of wind across a powerless aircraft now gliding on hope, memory, and physics. The runway shimmered in the distance, but the sky between here and there might as well have been an ocean. "Flaps," he murmured. His fingers adjusted the manual controls delicately, like tuning a broken violin. Altitude 4. 100 feet. Airspeed 147 knots. Wind calm. And yet the cabin behind him held a storm of silent prayers. In row 17, Charlotte watched Emily's face. The little girl was pale, her lips edged in that dangerous bluish tint that no 6-year-old should ever wear. Her small hands gripped Charlotte's coat sleeve like it was the edge of the world. "Does it hurt?" Charlotte asked softly. Emily shook her head. "Not really. Just feels like I'm not heavy anymore." Charlotte swallowed hard. She wasn't a mother. She'd never wanted to be. But in that moment, she would have traded every share, every merger, every boardroom in her life, just to give this girl one healthy breath. She leaned down forehead against Emily's. "Your dad's flying the whole sky just to bring you home." Emily gave a fragile smile. "He told me once. Some pilots fly with engines, but the good ones, they fly with love." Charlotte closed her eyes. That line would stay with her for the rest of her life. Jack's voice came back over the cabin speakers, calm but edged with something deeper reverence. "Final approach in 30 seconds. There will be no noise, no engines, just the wheels and the wind. This landing will feel different, but it's what we've got." He paused. "And I've flown 1,000 hours in worse. We're going to land. We're going to walk away. And tonight you'll hold the people you almost lost just a little tighter." In the silence that followed, a passenger in 21A whispered, "That's the first time I've ever believed a pilot was praying with us." Back in the cockpit, Jack adjusted rudder controls. Everything had to be perfect. No power meant no go-around. No second try. He guided the aircraft like a glider, angling slightly against the wind-bleeding speed carefully while conserving altitude. He could feel the weight of the plane, the lives inside it, pulling down, but he didn't fight it. He guided it. He trusted it, like he hadn't trusted anything in years. Sarah's voice came through his headset once more. "Jack, how's it looking?" "Like I'm landing a flying brick in a church parking lot," he said. "Copy that. We've got eyes on you. Fire teams are ready. Everyone's holding their breath." Jack exhaled. "Tell them to keep holding. We're not there yet." Charlotte looked out the window as the lights of Greensboro grew closer. The city felt quiet, like it knew what was coming. She looked down at Emily. "Do you hear that?" Emily blinked. "What, exactly?" Charlotte whispered. "It's the sound of your dad, catching the sky." Altitude 800 feet. The runway's threshold was now within striking distance. Jack's hands danced across the panel, adjusting trim, feathering the descent. Every movement now was artistry. He thought of his unit, of the mission gone wrong, of the friends he buried in the desert and the guilt he carried home. And he thought of Emily. and how she'd looked up at him that morning in Denver asking, "Will this doctor make me better?" "Daddy," he hadn't answered. He would now. Flaps full, gear locked. "Trim set," he muttered. "Airspeed, 126 knots. Perfect." The aircraft coasted lower nose, gently up. Jack's eyes narrowed as the runway markings grew larger, brighter, real. There was no sound, just the wind, and the hearts of everyone on board thudding in collective rhythm. Sandra crouched by the galley jump seat. She was whispering a prayer. Tommy, the teen in row 22, finally stopped shaking. He took out his earbuds, stared ahead. Mrs. Keating gripped the photograph of her late husband so tight it wrinkled. And Charlotte, she didn't look scared. She looked whole. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "He's bringing us home." Jack whispered, "Here we go." And then contact. The wheels met the earth with a sudden reverent kiss. A thud that reverberated through the fuselage, followed by a gentle shake as rubber met asphalt, as steel met friction, as man met miracle. No bounce, no veer, just glide, slide, and stillness. Jack deployed the spoilers manually, felt the drag grab the plane's weight like invisible hands helping to slow the beast. The end of the runway approached like a finish line drawn in mercy. When the plane rolled to a full stop just past the 2,000-foot mark, Jack sat in silence. His breath caught, his hands shook, and then he laughed. A breathless, cracked laugh that sounded like redemption. In the cabin, it was like time had stopped. Then a baby cried. Then someone clapped. And then the cabin erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause. The kind that rises not from relief alone, but from witnessing something impossible. Charlotte didn't move. She just leaned down, kissed Emily's forehead, and whispered, "You were right. He flew with love." Fire crews approached the aircraft. Emergency lights flashed across the tarmac. But inside that cabin, the real rescue had already happened. People who'd boarded as strangers had landed as survivors. And the man they'd once dismissed as just another working-class dad had just written a page in aviation history. Jack finally stood from the pilot's seat. His knees nearly gave out. Sandra appeared behind him, tears on her cheeks. "You did it," she whispered. Jack nodded slowly. "I didn't land a plane." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the back of the aircraft, toward his daughter. "I landed her future." And then, slowly, humbly, he opened the cockpit door and stepped back into a world that would never again underestimate the quiet man in row 17. Jack stood in the cockpit doorway, breathing in the cabin like it was the first lungful of air after drowning. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence said it all. The passengers stared, stunned, not at a uniforms, not at a medal-wearing hero, but at a man in a faded gray hoodie and work boots. A man with calloused hands, tired eyes, and shoulders that had just carried them all back to earth. Emily's voice broke through the stillness. Daddy Jack's gaze snapped to her. She was on her feet now, still weak, clinging to Charlotte's hand. Her face pale, but her eyes shining eyes that had never stopped believing. Jack walked down the aisle. He didn't rush. Every step felt like returning from a war only he knew he'd been fighting. When he reached her, Emily threw her arms around his waist, burying her face in his stomach. "You did it," she whispered. He knelt to her level, pulling her into his chest, holding her as if letting go might undo the miracle. "I promised you didn't. He murmured into her hair. "I said we'd make it." "You always say that," Emily said softly, "but this time, you flew without wings." Charlotte stepped back, giving them space, but her eyes never left Jack. When he finally looked up, their gazes locked, and in that look something unspoken passed between them. Not gratitude, not admiration, recognition. Outside, the emergency crews surrounded the aircraft like a second heartbeat, but no one came rushing in. Instead, the cockpit door was opened gently. The stairway was rolled up quietly, and when Jack stepped out carrying his daughter in his arms, no questions were shouted. No cameras shoved in his face, just silence. and nods. From firefighters, from air traffic controllers, from paramedics who had seen chaos but rarely witnessed grace. Sandra followed him out, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've asked to speak to the pilot." Jack glanced at the officials waiting beyond the emergency line, then at Emily still holding onto his shirt. "Tell them he said he's holding something more important right now." Inside the terminal, passengers were ushered to waiting rooms and triage areas. No injuries, just rattled nerves and overwhelmed hearts. Charlotte stood near the window watching Jack sit with Emily on a bench near baggage claim. His hand brushed her hair back while she sipped apple juice through a straw. A little girl's moment shared with a father the world now called a hero. But he didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man trying to breathe again. One of the federal agents approached Charlotte with a clipboard. "Ms. Hale." She raised a brow. He cleared his throat. "We're aware of your involvement, specifically your call to the FAA and your identification of the pilot. We'd like a statement." Charlotte looked past him toward Jack. Then she looked the agent square in the eye. "Here's my statement," she said. "He didn't land that plane for the headlines. He did it for the little girl he held in his arms. And if you're smart, you'll let him go home without asking him to explain what the sky already knows." The agent hesitated, then slowly lowered the clipboard. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the media hunted headlines elsewhere, Jack stepped outside into the cool North Carolina night. The air tasted like freedom. Charlotte joined him, arms crossed against the wind. "She asleep?" she asked. Jack nodded. "Out cold. Oxygen crash, probably. But the docs said she's stable." "That's good," Charlotte said. Then after a pause, "You know, I've been on more planes than I can count, sat next to some of the most qualified pilots in the country. But I've never felt safer than I did in seat 17C today." Jack smiled faintly. "I'm not even licensed anymore." Charlotte chuckled. "Funny. Didn't seem to matter when the sky gave you the mic." He looked at her then. Really looked, and she looked back not at the uniform he didn't wear, not at the rank he didn't hold, but at the man he had become in the space between takeoff and touchdown. "You know what scared me most in that cockpit?" Jack said, voice low. Charlotte shook her head. "It wasn't the altitude, or the silence, or even the thought of dying," he said. "It was the idea that maybe I'd forgotten how to fly when someone needed me most." She stepped closer. "But that's the thing about Grace, Jack. It doesn't ask you to be perfect. It just asks you to show up." He exhaled slowly, looking up at the sky. Funny how it took falling to remember how to fly. Charlotte smiled. "Or maybe you never forgot. You just needed a reason worth landing for." Their eyes met again. Something warm passed between them. Not the spark of attraction, the ember of understanding, of two people who had lost their way in different skies and found each other midair. Inside, Emily stirred in her sleep. Her small fingers curled gently around the photo she always kept in her backpack, the one where her dad held her as a baby standing near a C-130, sun in his eyes. She didn't know the world had just discovered him. She only knew what she always had, that her daddy could fly even when the sky said no. And outside, beneath the hum of runway lights, Jack Dawson and Charlotte Hale stood side by side, not as pilot and passenger, not as survivor and witness, but as two people grounded by fate and beginning to wonder what might happen if they took off again, together. The morning after the landing, headlines exploded. Unidentified civilian lands passenger jet after full system failure. Single father saves 137 lives in miracle glide. Flight 847's mystery pilot walked off the runway holding his daughter. But Jack Dawson never saw the headlines. He wasn't scrolling Twitter or answering emails. He wasn't sitting across from a late-night host or trending on any network. He was kneeling on the floor of a quiet hospital room lacing his daughter's shoes. "Too tight?" he asked, adjusting the left strap. Emily shook her head. "Just right." "You sure?" She looked up at him with a grin. Daddy? I just watched you land a plane with no engines. I think you can handle Velcro. He laughed, really laughed, the kind that came from below the ribs, the kind he hadn't felt since before she got sick. You're something else, you know, that I know, she said matter-of-factly. But I get it from you. Jack stood still, a bit sore from the strain of the landing. A doctor passed by the room and gave him a quiet nod, the kind you give someone who's no longer just another face in a waiting room. Emily swung her legs off the exam table. Do they think I'm better? They think you're strong, Jack said, and that's what we need to be right now. She took his hand as they walked out of the room. I was never scared. Jack glanced down. No. She shook her head. Because even when I couldn't feel the engines, I knew you were still flying. Down in the lobby, Charlotte waited. She wasn't wearing her CEO mask anymore. No blazer, no badge, just a denim jacket over a cotton tee and jeans, like someone who finally remembered how to be real. Jack noticed. So did Emily. Look, Daddy, she whispered. It's the lady from the sky. Charlotte smiled, walking toward them. Hey there, Captain Dawson. Jack winced. Don't start. What, too humble for your own headlines? I didn't land that plane to get famous. Charlotte tilted her head. Good, because you're not famous. You're known. And those are very different things. He paused. What's the difference? One ends when the cameras turn off, she said. The other stays with people. Changes how they see the world, how they see themselves. Jack looked away, unsure how to receive praise from a woman who once couldn't even meet his eyes. I read something last night, she continued, softer now. It said, some men build empires. Others build moments that last longer than empires ever could. Jack blinked. Did you come up with that? No, but I wish I had. Outside, a car pulled up to the curb. Jack's old mechanic friend Luis waved from behind the wheel, grinning like he'd just seen Elvis. Hey, hero boy, he shouted through the window. They're talking about you on every channel. Jack cringed. Great, guess I'm going to need a new face. You need a raise, Luis said. Also, maybe a cape. Charlotte leaned down to Emily. You okay if I borrow your dad for a few minutes? Emily shrugged. Sure, but bring him back. I always return borrowed things, Charlotte said, winking. Jack followed her a few steps away from the car toward a bench under the hospital's front awning. I heard the FAA's reviewing everything she said. They're not happy, Jack muttered. Technically, I wasn't certified for civilian aircraft anymore. No recent flight log. No official endorsement. And yet Charlotte said you brought everyone home. He sighed. Doesn't count for much on paper. Charlotte narrowed her eyes. Maybe paper isn't where your life belongs anymore. He looked at her. What are you saying? She reached into her bag, pulling out a slim envelope. I made a call. 2, actually. One to a friend in the FAA, another to someone who funds flight training programs for underserved communities. Jack didn't move. They want to talk to you, she said. About teaching. About building something real. About putting wings on kids who never thought they could leave the ground. Jack stared at the envelope. Why would you do that? Charlotte's voice softened. Because you reminded me that leadership isn't about control. It's about care and courage and showing up even when no one claps. He looked away, struggling to find words. Also, she added a teasing smile at the corners of her mouth. I wanted an excuse to see you again. He smirked. That sounds more honest. She reached into her back pocket, pulling out a folded slip of paper. There's a number in here in case. You ever feel like flying again? Not in the air, just, toward something. Jack took it carefully as if it might disappear. I'm not good at beginnings, he said. Charlotte tilted her head. That's fine. I'm great at helping people finish things. Maybe we meet somewhere in the middle. He smiled. Then something shifted in his expression. Thank you, he said, voice quiet, for believing when I didn't ask anyone to. Charlotte stepped closer, just enough for her voice to reach only him. You didn't have to ask. You showed us. And the kind of man who flies toward fire for his daughter deserves someone to fly back toward him. Their hands brushed. Not a kiss, not a promise, but the beginning of something that didn't need a destination to feel real. From the car, Emily leaned out the window. "Dade, I'm getting old over here." Jack laughed, shaking his head. He turned to Charlotte one last time. "See you again," Charlotte nodded. "Count on it." As he walked back to the car, Charlotte stood still, arms crossed, watching the man who saved a plane disappear into a new sky. No engines, no applause, just motion. And maybe that was the kind of love story she'd been waiting for all along. One that didn't take off with noise, just quietly, gracefully, touched down. The footage played on a loop across every major network security camera clips passenger cell phone videos, shaky zooms of Flight 847 as it touched down with no engines, no thrust, no sound. Just a smooth, impossible landing that seemed to defy physics. And there, at the center of it all, was a single image the media couldn't stop using. A man in worn work boots and a gray hoodie stepping off the aircraft with a child in his arms. No medals, no press conference, no need for applause, just presence. Jack watched it all from the cracked screen of a television in Luis's garage. He stood beside a rusted Mustang with its hood up, wiping his hands on a rag like it was any other Tuesday. Luis leaned on the counter behind him. "That's the 5th time this hour. They're obsessed." Jack didn't answer. Luis clicked the remote off. "You know, I used to think being invisible was your superpower," he said. "But I was wrong." Jack glanced over. "Your real power," Luis added. "You show up when no one else does." Jack shrugged. "That's just what dads do." Luis grinned. "Nah, plenty of dads leave. You landed a plane." Meanwhile, across town, Charlotte was having a different kind of morning. Her office glass steel and silence felt colder now. The polished awards on her shelf seemed to stare back at her, hollow and proud. She stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hands, watching the city breathe beneath her. A knock at the door. Her assistant peeked in. "There's another request. CNN this time. They want an exclusive on what happened. You and Jack together." Charlotte turned. "Tell them no." The assistant blinked. Again, Charlotte nodded. "Tell them he didn't save lives for ratings." "And neither did I." The assistant hesitated. "They also sent these." She handed Charlotte a manila envelope. Inside were a dozen still screenshots from the plane from the terminal from airport security cameras. In every single one, Charlotte was looking at Jack. Not in fear, not in admiration, in recognition. She set them down one by one and whispered to herself, "The world saw a pilot. I saw a man." That night, Jack sat with Emily at their tiny kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the low rustle of wind against the window. Emily held a crayon in one hand and her notebook in the other. "I drew something," she said. Jack looked up from the dish he was scrubbing. "Yeah," she nodded. "It's you, in the cockpit." He dried his hands and came over. The drawing showed a big plane, bright yellow with a stick figure in the window. "You gave me a full head of hair," Jack said, smiling. "You had hero hair that day." He laughed. "Hero hair. Is that a thing?" Emily leaned against him. "It is now." Jack pulled her into his side. "You know I didn't do that alone, right?" Emily nodded. The sky helped. Jack looked at her eyes soft. "You helped?" She grinned. "I know." A week later, an envelope arrived. No return address. The handwriting was precise military block letters. Inside a single sheet of paper with a seal at the top, Department of the Air Force. Jack opened it slowly. To Mr. Jack Dawson. There are pilots who fly with authorization, and there are those who fly with unshakable purpose. In the rarest cases, both exist in the same man. Consider this letter your reinstatement. Should you choose to return to the sky, the runway is yours, any sky, any day. With respect, Commander Sarah Lynn, 139th Airlift Wing. Jack read it twice, then folded it carefully, placing it in Emily's notebook right next to her drawing. Later that evening, a knock at the door. Jack opened it to find Charlotte standing there, tousling her hair, holding a paper bag, and wearing the same shy smile she'd had at the hospital. "I brought dinner," she said. He stepped aside. "I didn't know we were doing that. I didn't know we were doing this," she replied, walking in. "But I figured if you can land a plane with no power, I can figure out takeout." Jack chuckled. "That's a low bar." Charlotte looked around the apartment, modest, lived-in, full of warmth. Her eyes stopped on the wall above the kitchen sink. There, newly pinned between a calendar and a child's finger painting, was a photo of Flight 847 touching down. "I like what you've done with the place," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly cover of Architectural Digest." She turned to face him. "No, but it's the first place I've walked into where the walls don't apologize for being real." He paused. "Is that your way of saying you missed me?" Charlotte looked up, her voice soft. "No, that's my way of saying. I came back on purpose." Jack studied her for a beat, then said, "I wasn't sure if I should call." She stepped closer. "Then I'm glad I beat you to it." They sat together at the table, Jack, Charlotte, Emily between them, sharing fries and fried chicken out of brown paper wrappers, laughing over spilled sauce and stories of the sky. It was quiet. No flashbulbs, no cameras, no headlines. Just three people grounded in something deeper than applause. Connection. Maybe even the start of something they didn't have to define. Not yet. Charlotte reached across the table, brushed Emily's bangs from her eyes, and whispered, "You know, your dad didn't just land a plane." Emily looked up. "He landed us all. The envelope wasn't stamped. It didn't come by mail. It was hand-delivered early morning, slid beneath the apartment door like a secret meant only for one set of hands." Jack found it while tying Emily's shoelaces, her lunchbox half-zipped, and cartoon stickers hanging off the edges. "What's that?" she asked. Jack stared at it. Plain white. No return address. Just his name in sharp black ink, Jack Dawson. "Don't know," he murmured. Emily, ever curious, leaned in. "Looks official." He cracked a smile. "You're 6. How do you know what official looks like?" She grinned. "Because it doesn't have glitter." He opened it slowly, the paper inside, thick, textured, formal. He unfolded the single page and began to read. As his eyes moved down the letter, his jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the edge just a little more. And by the time he reached the signature at the bottom, he was no longer standing in their tiny kitchen. He was in a hangar in Missouri 14 years ago, learning how to fly on instinct and guts. He was in a desert windstorm, coaxing a burning C-130 down on manual flaps with 30 paratroopers in the back and his heart in his throat. And he was in that cockpit again, Flight 847, listening to the sky go silent and the future whisper, "Now." The letter read, "Jack, some pilots fly with clearances. Others fly with courage. And a rare few fly with something heavier conviction. Your actions aboard Flight 847 were not just heroic. They were instructional. We intend to use your approach in future emergency training materials. You redefined what calm under pressure means, what leadership looks like when no one's looking, what a man does when he has nothing to prove but everything to protect. This is not a summons. It's not a contract. It's a door, and it stays open as long as you choose to walk through it. Respectfully, Commander Michael Blaine, Deputy Director of Emergency Aviation Operations." Charlotte arrived that afternoon, not with a business proposal or press packet, but with 2 coffees and a knowing look. "You read it," she said, handing him the drink. Jack nodded. "Yeah." "Are you going back?" He didn't answer at first. He looked toward the window where Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, cutting paper hearts and taping them to the fridge. "She's happy here," Jack said. "Stable. I finally learned how to keep the ground from shifting under her." Charlotte stepped closer, her voice low. You didn't just land a plane, Jack. You showed the world that the sky isn't reserved for the privileged." He looked at her eyes, clouded. "What if I'm only good in emergencies? What if flying is the only place I ever felt like myself, because I didn't have to be anyone else?" She stepped even closer now. "And what if that's not true? What if you were always that man, but no one ever gave you the right seat until it all broke down?" He studied her. Quiet, then smiled just barely. "You've got away with words." You know that Charlotte gave a soft laugh. "I write better speeches for other people than I do for myself." "And what speech would you write for you?" he asked. She hesitated, then shrugged. Probably something like, "Don't let fear dress up as logic. Don't let comfort pretend it's peace." Jack looked down at the letter again. "Is it crazy that I want to do it?" he asked. "No," she said. "What's crazy is that you think you need permission." He met her gaze. "What if I fall?" Charlotte's answer was immediate and soft. "Then fall into something that matters." That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Jack sat alone in the living room with the letter on the table. Charlotte curled up on the couch nearby, reading a worn paperback with the spine nearly split in half. "Do you miss it?" he asked her. She looked up. "Miss what?" "The version of you before the CEO title. The girl who didn't always have to win." Charlotte closed the book. "Some days," she said. "But I think she's still here. Just quieter. Like she's waiting for something worth speaking up for." Jack stood, walked over to her, then sat beside her on the couch. "You're not quiet," he said. "You're just measured." "That's different." She tilted her head. "And what about you?" He thought about it, then answered, "I'm a mechanic who never stopped being a pilot." She smiled. "I'm glad you finally believe that." In the quiet that followed, Charlotte rested her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like he had to earn the moment. It was just there, undemanding, undeclared, like landing gear meeting runway, like love that didn't ask for declarations, only presence. At dawn, Jack woke early. He stood by Emily's bedroom door, watching her sleep. Her breathing was soft, her face peaceful. He remembered every moment that almost took her from him, and every mile of sky that tried and failed. Then he whispered to no one, "You're the reason I fly." He returned to the kitchen, picked up the envelope once more, and tucked it inside the front page of her drawing notebook. Not as a decision, but as a seed. Because some letters don't demand action. They wait, like runways do. And pilots, the real kind, always know when it's time to take off again. 1 year later, the snow returned. But this time it didn't feel like something to brace against. It felt like a memory coming home. The city had changed in subtle ways, more lights in the windows of old buildings, more strangers smiling at each other on subway stairs. And nestled between 2 rows of brick townhouses on a quiet midtown block stood Hearth Village. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a community. A greenhouse bloomed behind the main hall with winter herbs tucked under clear glass. A reading nook beside the fireplace now held stories in 3 languages. There were murals, handwritten signs, mismatched mugs stacked neatly in the cafe, and laughter rising from every corner like steam. And at the heart of it all was a small cottage tucked near the community garden, with cinnamon on the windowsill and boots drying by the door. Inside, warmth wrapped around the walls like a hug. Jack stood at the stove, stirring something rich and golden. He hummed softly a half-forgotten tune he used to whistle when no one was listening. From behind, Charlotte slid her arms around his waist. "You made real mac and cheese again," she teased, peeking over his shoulder. "Only the best for today," Jack said. "Besides, boxed cheese feels illegal on a day like this." Charlotte grinned. "You're getting sentimental." He turned to face her hands still on the spoon. "Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my rugged ex-mechanic image." She kissed his cheek. Too late. Out in the courtyard, Emily stood in the middle of a dozen kids showing them how to pre-flight check a paper glider. She wore a red scarf, oversized goggles on her head, and the confident grin of someone who had survived the impossible and made it look like recess. A small wooden sign hung above the entrance to the new building just behind her wings for Emily Flight Engineering and Dream Lab for kids who dare to try. The program had started with 10 kids from the neighborhood. Now it had a waiting list, and a volunteer roster that included real pilots, engineers, artists, and even a retired NASA tech who brought freeze-dried ice cream once a month. Emily raised her hand and called out, "Who remembers what the elevators do?" A shy girl in the back raised her fingers. "They help you go up or down depending on where you lean." "Exactly," Emily beamed. "And remember, you don't always need engines. Sometimes glide is enough." Jack watched her from the window. His voice caught. "She's more grounded now than I ever was." Charlotte stepped beside him. "She's more lift, too. That's what makes her dangerous." He laughed, and uncatchable. Charlotte looked at him. "You're not trying to catch her, Jack. You're teaching her to fly." He turned to her eyes, soft. "You know, I used to think saving her was the only thing that mattered, that landing that plane was the peak. But now," Charlotte asked, "now I see that the real miracle wasn't the landing. It's what we did after we touched down." That evening, a small celebration filled the main hall. String lights glowed from the ceiling beams. Plates clinked. Stories flowed, most of them slightly exaggerated. Someone played acoustic guitar in the corner. Children darted between legs, tossing paper airplanes with each other's names written on the wings. In the middle of it all, Emily climbed onto a crate. She tapped a spoon against her cup. "Excuse me," she shouted. "Can I say something?" The crowd hushed. Emily straightened her goggles. "1 year ago, my daddy flew a plane with no engines, and people called him a hero. But I already knew he was one. Even before that." Jack blinked. His fingers tightened around his glass. Emily continued. "And this place, Wings for Emily, isn't really about me. It's for every kid who ever thought they couldn't be brave because they were small or quiet or sick or scared. Because guess what?" She pointed toward the ceiling. "You don't need to roar to take off. You just need someone to believe you can." The applause shook the room. Charlotte turned to Jack, eyes glistening. "She's got your timing. She's got your courage," Jack whispered. Later that night, after the guests had gone and snow had begun to fall again in soft, forgiving waves, Jack stood outside beneath the stars. The wind was gentle, the kind that nudged your collar up, not your spirit down. Charlotte came to his side, wrapping her scarf tighter. "You okay?" Jack nodded. "Just remembering." She waited. He pointed upward. "See that one?" he said. "Brightest one tonight." Charlotte followed his gaze. "Yeah, she used to think that was where hearts went when they stopped working." Charlotte said nothing. She just slipped her fingers into his. And now she finally asked. Jack smiled, eyes never leaving the sky. "Now I think it's where they go when they start working again." She leaned into him. "You know, I used to be afraid of falling." "I know, but now." He turned toward her. She smiled. "I think I'm more afraid of never jumping." Jack laughed low, soft, full. "Then let's jump, Charlotte." And right there, under a sky that had once threatened to swallow them whole, 2 people who had learned to land finally took off. Together, quietly, steadily, without fear, not flying to escape the past, but toward a future neither of them thought they'd ever deserve until they learned that, sometimes, you only find your wings after the fall. Absolutely. Here's a heartfelt and inspiring outro tailored for your storytelling video with a smooth call to action that resonates emotionally and encourages engagement. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that strength doesn't always shout, that love can heal even the deepest cracks, and that sometimes it's the quietest souls who carry us through the storm, then I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your country city, or even just in the comments below. I read every one, and your stories, your presents mean more than you know. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of second chances, quiet courage, and the beauty of being human, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, so you never miss when we take off again. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for spending time with this story. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you're safe, seen, and reminded. Sometimes, even in free fall, we find our wings. Until next time, stay grounded and keep flying.